Welcome to the Creating Your Conditions podcast, a work of understanding the conditions we are given, the conditions we create, and the conditions we have yet to achieve. You can find us at Creating Your Conditions on Instagram. My name is Vin. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am your host. In today's episode, I am interviewing Kelcie Parra. Kelcie hails from Lubbock, Texas, where she went to Texas Tech University for her bachelor's and master's in kinesiology. No, she does not work in a remotely related field, so that money was well spent. She has worked in nonprofits the majority of her career, serving individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and has also worked in local government. She had the honor of working alongside Vin at San Diego Pride, and is now executive director of Crisis House, a nonprofit serving individuals fleeing domestic violence and their children, as well as folks experiencing homelessness. She values folks that are intentional, honest, irreverent, and selfless. Her kitten, Mr. Business, is 95% of her personality. The remaining 5% is spent adoring her honest, irreverent, selfless wife, Uginea. Welcome to the podcast, Kelcie.
Thank you for having me. That is an amazing bio. I don't know who
Yeah,
wrote that.
yeah, it was well done. It was very humoring and also humble.
Yeah,
I'll get into it. Cool. And just for some context for folks, yeah, Kelcie and I did work together, and she was my manager at San Diego Pride. It was good times. Good times.
good times indeed.
See, why don't we get started, and why don't you tell us a bit about your background, you were given, and you can answer that. It's like your ethnic background, how you were raised.
Sure. So, grew up in Lubbock, Texas. My father was a high school teacher. He taught journalism and creative writing and photography and kind of anything in that sphere for many years at Lubbock High School. My mother was secretary at a variety of places, but at one of the local JUCOs. Lubbock is very conservative. I think it has the highest number of churches per capita. I don't know if that's still true or not, but it was at one point. So very, very religious. My father was an elder in our church. My mother taught ladies Bible school. I, volunteered with Vacation Bible School and went on mission trips and played a lot of sports. I stayed busy. I was a tomboy. So I was always outside playing with the boys in the neighborhood, all sorts of sports and just roughhousing, climbing trees, just kind of like a little lesbian Huck Finn. I have an older
That's
brother.
amazing.
I have an older
Lesbian
brother.
husband.
He was really into technology and science and just really bright kid. I have a younger sister, so I'm the middle child, and my younger sister was bubbly and outgoing and did some sports, but also did cheerleading and debate and band, and so she was involved in a lot of things. But yeah, so we grew up, our life revolved around the church, basically. We went to church twice on Sunday. We had Wednesday
Twice.
night church twice, in the morning and in the evening, with a nice little nap in between. Wednesday night was church, and then there were typically youth group events or Bible studies or, so we were looking at 4 or 5 times a week. We would either be at church or at church activities. I threw myself into theology, learning about it and trying to understand it. And so that's kind of the backdrop of where I grew up. As I got older, I'm assuming you want me to kind of take you all the way to my current condition.
No, that's a good place to pause. I have some questions already. What does it mean to be an elder of the church? Is your dad right?
So that's a great question. Our denomination was Church of Christ, and there were certain positions, basically leadership for the church, kind of like board of directors. And so there
Hmm.
were levels. There were deacons. That was the first level. And then above that were elders, and they were the shepherds of the church is what they're called. And so yeah, so he had a leadership role from everything dealing with the finances to, do we build a new building? Do we offer new services, new programs? Do we hire a pastor? It was kind of more administrative in nature.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think? How do you think that impacted the way that you think? I know you're not really connected to the church now, but the way that I've only known you as like my manager and as a very high level logic person thinker. So like, how do you think that impacted the way that you thought about things in your youth?
I would say less to do with strategy because only men were allowed to be
Mm,
elders or deacons. That was a huge point that I probably should have included. And I do want to say, regardless of my personal beliefs about this particular religion or any religion, I don't want it to come across as me speaking ill of that religion because I do believe that people should be allowed to believe whatever they want to believe and follow whatever religion they want to believe. So I will tell you how it all affected me, and that
hmm
if it comes across as having a value, I apologize, but I'm trying not to. So the first thing I knew was, I think almost implicitly, it wasn't said, but through that, knowing that, my mother was never going to be considered for an elder and there's no way I would ever be in a leadership role. I think early on I felt what it communicated to me was that there was less value in women and we had to go home and ask men if we had a question. We couldn't, like in the middle of church, ask a question. And so I think that probably affected more my view of gender roles and my value based on those gender roles more than it did anything to do with like strategy or leadership or anything of that nature. It was more you're you're a woman, so you're second.
this is the box that you were put in.
Yes, absolutely.
Mom was a secretary at something called JUCON. I don't know if I got that right.
Oh, I'm sorry, JUCO, a junior college, like a
Oh, okay.
community college.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned that you and your siblings, you all had a lot of different hobbies and activities to keep yourselves busy. What was like the dynamic between you all and your parents?
So in the vein of hobbies and activities, our relationship was my parents believe very strongly that children should be busy. And so I think it's funny, but as a kid, my mother would come into the bedroom and open the blinds and pull the covers off and said, "Look to the ant, you sluggard." And that's from the Bible. But so they kept us with chores, and we each had our own, whether it's mowing the lawn or taking out the trash or dishes or whatever. We all contributed to the household, and then outside of that, keeping us busy with school or even just this is going to sound bad, but not letting us in the house, especially during the summer. Like go out, do things, be active, and so I think what it created was a sense of work ethic and responsibility and just an understanding that there's things to be done. There's ways to improve yourself. There's ways to help the family. And so I think on that level, just staying busy. And so yeah, we all pick different ways to do that. But I was largely outside. I just love being outside, riding my bike, playing with other people. There's a school at the end of our street, and I used to ride my bike, and on the back side of the bleachers, you could climb up, and I had a board that I just put it there and sat on top of that board, and it looked out onto just a fallow field, so it hasn't been planted with anything. It's just empty. And that's where I would go like most nights and just sit and watch the sunset. And I very much have always been a little bit of a loner and um, appreciated my own company. And so being out of the house and being busy and being in nature was great for me because I very much enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also just sounds like when everyone's doing a bunch of stuff, it can be difficult to just rest on your own time around everybody. Like you can't be caught just hanging out in your room. You got to go pretend to go do something.
That's true. Yeah. So it definitely, like I said, and I mean, my father worked multiple jobs and my mother was working. And so I think we just saw modeled for us that work ethic. I think also, we didn't have a lot of money. And so with my father working multiple jobs and three kids, and there was also just a bit of stress and strain in the house. And so I think being outside of the house also was a little bit of a haven for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't we like move to your like earlier adulthood after high school, if you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think I may start. Yeah, let me start at high school. So in high school, I was involved in sports. Don't like to toot my own horn, but was pretty good at basketball. So I was on varsity as a sophomore, was a captain my junior year and senior year. And around that time, I just had a lot of death in my life. A friend of mine passed away, my grandfather passed away, another relative passed away. And so in high school, I was working out before school, in the middle of the day, and then after school, and then would go home, do homework, and then get up and do it all over again. And so as all these deaths started happening or things started happening in our family, I just got to a point where I couldn't understand why I was putting so much energy into this thing anymore.
Basketball.
Basketball, back home, basketball, and especially with the coaches I had at the time, was a little bit abusive. Um, it was abusive, yeah, verbally
Yeah.
abusive, and I think just created a level of stress for me that was um, I thought I had to take. And then as people started passing away, I realized like this isn't worth it. Like it kind of created a value system for me that I didn't know I had the power to create. And
Mm.
so I got some offers to play in college, but ultimately we had some challenging stuff going on at home. And so I opted not to take any of those offers. And I stayed at Lubbock at Texas Tech University and started going to undergrad there and then worked in a little supermarket also full time. So it was, again, I was always busy, just constantly doing things and usually running from school to work and having to change in the work bathroom and getting done there at about midnight and then having to figure out how to do homework. And so all throughout college, I was very busy. I was active in our college ministry. Definitely found a sense of community there that I appreciated. And so I kind of had my church friends and then I had my school friends. And around that time is when I kind of started to get disillusioned with religion. And some of it was, I think, possibly just my analytical side, just trying to make things make sense. And then I think another part of it was probably maybe just kind of seeing through the veil a little bit. And so around that time, I started going to a church that was specifically for folks experiencing homelessness. And it was across the street from this like beautiful multi-million-dollar church. But they wouldn't let folks experiencing homelessness there. They had to
Oh.
go to this corrugated metal building for their church service. And so again, I saw that and was like questioning how people can think that's in alignment with what they were preaching or what they saw in this book that they, use as their go-to. And so through that, I started to see the real people affected by religion and met a gentleman that the name he told me was Red, and Red had been homeless since he was 14 and had he said he would just get abused every time he was put in a foster home, and so he'd run away, and then they would bring him back and take him to another home. He'd get abused, he'd run away, they'd bring him back, and he said around 14 they didn't go looking for him that last time. And he said he'd been on the street ever since then. And he said, I couldn't have a job and a home any more than you could live on the street. We've learned two different skill sets. And I
Mm.
remember thinking that's really true. Like I was taught to go get a job. I was taught, they went and got me a bank account. And so if you start out at 14 without any guidance, I can imagine that what you've learned helped you survive. And so I just asked him if I could just spend a weekend with him on the street. And he said yes, but took me through a boot camp basically. I would meet him at Denny's and he would walk me through everything. And some of it was life saving, like you can't show up without a story. You have to have a story of where you were before this. You can't be new on the street or you're going to be in danger. Don't wear any new clothing or anything that even looks remotely new. So wear stuff that's dirty and torn up and all of it basically because you become a target otherwise. And so I spent time with him on the street and it was extremely eye-opening and again, I think started to refine my value system and how I saw people. And how I question situations, because I think it's pretty clear these days people have an opinion about folks experiencing homelessness. And so to live it firsthand and see what he went through and hear his story, it made me change how I viewed everything. But ultimately, instead of taking things at face value, like get to know the situation, get to know the people, and then make a decision. And so it was around that time that I started to stop going to the college ministry, started to really, I tried to learn Greek and Hebrew, and so I could better understand the true intent of this Bible that I was reading, because again, the people I saw weren't really living up to that. And so it didn't take long before I can't, there was some really famous person, and I apologize for butchering this, but a classic writer that said something about, you don't realize how weak a wall is until you pull one brick out and it all falls down. And I feel like that's what happened. Like I just pulled a couple bricks down and out, and then suddenly the whole wall fell down. And then I was left with, oh, I'm not religious. This is not what I believe, and I can't honestly say that I do. And so that was a huge thing, and it was a huge rift. My parents believe firmly that hell is real, and that I would be going there if I step away from this faith tradition. And so it was hard on them, and it was hard on me as a young adult.
How old were you, by the
Again,
way?
I was in my early 20s. I was still in undergrad, and then I stayed in grad school for a few years, and so it was like early to mid 20s. And so yeah, so I kind of pulled away from religion. Also started to realize that, and later, it was probably my mid 20s, around that time, started to realize that maybe the fact that I have never dated a man, never been interested dating a man, meant something. I
Yeah.
kept thinking, well, I just haven't found the right whatever. And I know we all know this story. And so because those questions and that realization came kind of concurrently with my departure from religion, I think that created some thoughts among friends and family that, it's because that I'm gay that I stepped away from the church, and that couldn't be further from the truth. But even when I realized that I had no attraction to men, I still just said, well, I'm not going to be gay, because my brother came out when he was 18 and was disowned, and people came to his job and said, well, we're not going to shop here anymore because he's you're employing a homosexual. So I saw all that happen. I saw everything he went through, and I was like, that's not happening to me. And so
Mm.
so I just tried to fake it. I was like, surely I fake it enough, like eventually I'll start to feel something. And I did. I started to feel hopeless and depressed and suicidal, and was slowly just caving in on myself. And I don't know if you need content warnings, but started doing self-injurious behaviors, and I had a stint where I went to the emergency room because I felt like I was going to do irreparable harm to myself. Um, and so yeah, that college was a tough time for me, just because I feel like I was shedding a lot of beliefs and then having a lot of realizations about myself and the world and how I fit into it. And so it was a very eye-opening time, very painful time. My sister is why I'm still here. She went to the emergency room and picked me up and brought me home, and then slept on the floor at my apartment so she would know if I got up in the middle of the night. And sorry. And
No,
so
take your time.
she was there for me at a really hard time. And we grew a lot closer, because I think by that time she had also stepped away from religion. And so I think kind of in that crucible of change, my sister and I grew a lot closer. And then I tried to, because admittedly when my brother came out, I also somewhat disowned him.
Yeah.
So kind of circling back to him and trying to find that reconciliation and redemption was important. And of course he I think when I told him I was gay, he was like, well, yeah. And then he just went on to the next topic. Like it wasn't like I told you so, like how dare you, you came and read the Bible to me. He was just like, yeah, sure are. Okay, so anyway, when you come to Dallas, we're gonna go and do this. Like he just brushed right past it, which I
Yeah.
appreciated because was nervous about telling him. But yeah, so there was a lot of structure in my childhood and my early childhood, and then a lot of change in my early adulthood, and I think just becoming true to myself, not only, in my sexuality, but also just what do I believe and what do I value and what what rules do I want for my life? And by that I mean I had a youth pastor that said, you need to create rules for how you're going to live your life. And some of it could
Mm.
be I'm going to look people in the eye when I talk to them. I'm going to make sure if I tell someone I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And or I'm always going to look for the best in people. And so I think I started creating those rules and kind of how I wanted to live my life. Yeah, that's my mid or wait, quarter 25, my quarter life crisis.
Cool, cool, good.
Yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that visit to the ER. I'm glad your sister was there and how, out of that tragedy, you reconnected and kind of had this sibling conversation about your identities in like part your sexuality, but then also like what have we been believing our whole lives,
Yeah.
and like, oh, we're siblings, we get this about each other. I already know that, we can move on. Like we don't need to get into it. I got you. I'm also gay.
So I was lucky to have them, but so that was up till 25-ish, and then or did you have follow-up questions? I'm sorry.
I so like, you talked a little. I did have one follow-up question. You talked about how you kind of identified as a tomboy in high school when you were playing sports and things, and then it wasn't like the biggest reason for like leaving the church, but it was definitely like more minor one, because the values
Mhm.
ones and like seeing the disparity between communities was obviously like more like WTF, why are we doing this? How can we
Jarring,
say
yeah.
we're doing this as a institution of like religion? Um, but yeah, like how did you were saying like I'm not gonna be gay, because you saw your brother kind of get like left out
Mhm.
of your family. And so what was that faking it like, in terms of, you said you didn't date men, but were you dating women or were you just dating no one?
So I didn't date women until I was 26 or 7. While I was still in Lubbock, basically, I would go on a date with a man, and I just would be filled with such sorrow and such depression, and especially because I had women or friends at the time that female friends that clearly now looking back I was attracted to, I had feelings for, but I just wouldn't recognize them as that. And so I remember feeling so happy when I was with, girl A, and then I would that night go on a date with guy A, and the stark contrast between those two experiences. I would never respond to their calls after that, like after the first date. Or I'll just be very candid. Like I was very sexually promiscuous. I just thought maybe I just need to have sex with men and then that will
Mm.
somehow, you know, flip the switch and make me a hetero. Which
I
it didn't.
love,
I just went deeper and deeper into a depression because really in my head, my thought was I either have to lie to men that honestly, the guys I went on dates with were lovely human beings and so kind and thoughtful and chivalrous and, went to church with their moms and like good guys. And I would have to lie to them forever and pretend I loved them, pretend I was attracted to them. So that's one option, hopeless heteronormativity. Or I had to come out and go through everything my brother went through, lose everyone, everyone I grew up going to church with a million times a week, my family, my friends, be completely alone and enter a new community that I didn't know about, didn't even have, inroads into. So it was just, yeah, it was very, very depressing prospect. It was, what's that called, that movie? Sophie's Choice.
Sophie's
It was a
Choice.
Sophie's Choice.
Mm. I didn't watch that
But
movie.
ultimately, I haven't either. I've just used that phrase in context. But ultimately, I decided, much like with religion, because I figured if there's a God, he didn't want me to lie about believing in him if I honestly didn't.
Mm.
So I can't lie about that the same way I can't lie about how I feel about someone. And so
Yeah.
ultimately, I just went with the honest route. And I did not come out when I was in Lubbock. I felt that was too much of a risk. So I, previously to moving to San Diego in one of my deep depressions, got rid of all my possessions. And so I was in grad school at the time, so I had a computer and I had a air mattress. And that's all I had in my
Whoa.
apartment. Now I know it should have been a huge sign to someone that I was not well mentally. At the time, I was reading all these books about stoicism and monks, and so I just thought I was being really holy. But anyway, so I didn't have any possessions, and so I was working on a PhD, and I was sitting outside of a class one day, and again I just had this moment where I'm like, what am I doing? My brother had moved to Fort Worth by that time. My sister had moved to Dallas, so I was kind of alone, and so I just stood up and walked away, and I didn't go to class, and I sent an email to my professors that I was dropping out, and I overnighted a check to a stranger uh, in San Diego. And I
Wow.
said, yeah. And so I dropped out of school, and me and my dog Scout, drove from Lubbock to San Diego, where I had never been, and gave it a shot. Again, now I know that impulsivity was depression, but very glad that I did it. I'm thankful for that depression because it did bring me here. Um, so yeah, that's what got me out to San Diego and moved here in 2006 and started working at Special Olympics.
How old were you when you moved here to San Diego?
20,
Sorry, I'm in Atlanta. 26. Okay. So that's the same year as the ER visit?
it was around that time. I want to say that was maybe
Okay.
25 and then this was 26. Like it was
Wow.
all, yeah, pretty crammed together.
Yeah.
Yeah, moved out here and then didn't have a job initially and had a really hard time finding one because 26-year-olds don't realize that if you don't have job experience, it's hard to get a job. And so I actually ran out of money, and my brother paid my rent for one more month. And during that month is when I got the job at Special Olympics. But if he had not done that, I was going to have to move back home to Lubbock. So I always credit him with keeping me here, which is where I found wonderful friends and my wife and chosen family.
Yeah. What was that first role at Special Olympics?
At Special Olympics, my first role was sports manager. So I oversaw all the sports throughout the county, all the volunteer coaches, getting equipment to everybody, running all the tournaments, kind of just that sport and volunteer side. It was all that combined. And then I had a boss tell me that it's going to be hard to find another job like this. So I need different experience. And so she sent me to get my certificate in fundraising management. And I started doing development. And I stayed at Special Olympics almost a decade. It was 9 years and change. It's a wonderful organization. I will forever encourage people to support it and donate it to it. I loved my time there, loved the people I met, loved the leaders that showed me how to lead in really good ways. So very, very grateful for Special Olympics and the opportunity they gave me.
Yeah. What is what did you learn from there on how to lead that was different from your upbringing? I'm sure a lot, but I'm curious since that was like before I
Yeah.
met you. So
I think there I was the first place where I felt accepted as I was. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with it's just Southern California, but everybody I encountered was so um accepting and especially in that field, like very selfless and kind of a servant leadership that I very much appreciated. You know, folks that no matter how many years they'd been in the business would get down in the trenches with us and help. They would help us work through problems instead of just dictating what we should do. They really helped us learn how to solve problems, how to be client focused, client centered. I learned a lot about that. And then honestly, Special Olympics doesn't really do races by gender. And so it was really cool just to see they just did it by time. So like at a track meet, like if you run 50 seconds for a race, everybody that runs 50 seconds is in that race together. Doesn't matter what your gender is. And I've always taken that and thought that's such a cool way to approach life. Like it really just put the people that run together. Like what does it matter about anything else, you know?
Yeah.
And then a lot of the leaders that I saw there were humble, and I didn't really have a lot of folks there that were very egotistical. It was again, I think that servant leadership model is what I saw and very much aligned with. I loved that idea of leaders that didn't put themselves first or on top, or they were there for the athletes, and that's why we were all there. So everybody pitched in. I mean, I think it also helped that for the entire county we only had 4 staff, so you kind of had to pitch in. But they could have said no and sat on their, you know, in their ivory tower. But yeah, learned a lot about leadership from there.
That's awesome. And oh,
Well, I was going to go on to the next phase, but was going to
is the next
pause.
phase She Fest?
No. Wait, when did I start that? 2014? No. Well, yes. When did I go to Poway? 2015? I really need you to help me.
Sorry.
So
It wasn't in your bio.
That's not important. Mr. Business is important. Oh, also my wife is important. Can you edit that so it's the opposite?
But it was 95.5%, right?
I know, I just realized that. She won't listen. It's fine.
That's not true.
Oh yeah, around around 20. Well, actually earlier than that. This is going to be a what's it called when it's not in the right order? Stick. Non-linear. That works. So when I first got here, I had a hard time meeting people. I know this is going to be hard to believe, a little socially awkward, and so I had a hard time finding friends. And so what I did was I decided that I was going to start a meetup group. So I started the San Diego Lesbian Meetup Group. And in my head, I'm thinking, fine, you don't want to be friends with me? I'm going to make you come to me and ask to be in my group. That wasn't my thought at all, but I was just kidding. And so I started hosting all these different events. Some of them were happy hours, some of them were kickballs, some of them were picnics. We just kind of, you know, bonfires. We did all sorts of things, but it was a way for me to just meet people and meet friends. And from there.
And this was just on your free time.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Putting that out there for folks.
Yes, I had a full-time job, and then I would do this. And then after that, there was a woman up in the Pacific Northwest that ran these events she called them seasoned lesbians, so older lesbians. And she wanted to expand into Southern California, so she asked if I would run them. And so I started running these events that were initially called hot flash dances. I did eventually ask her to change that name for branding purposes, but basically we would hold events from about 5 to 9 or 6 to 10 at local LGBTQ, you know, bars and clubs. And that's typically, they were slow anyway, and so they wouldn't charge us. And we would play early in the evening, like at 5 or 6, we would play music from the 50s and 60s. And then with each passing hour, we would just increase the decade until, you know, 9:30, we're playing today's hits. And it just blew up. We went from having maybe a handful of people there, you know, to having upwards of 200 women come to these events. In a callback to my childhood, eventually this person said, you know, I don't want men at these events. And she's like, and I don't want bisexual either. I need you to ask them how they identify before they walk in the door. Immediately, that's not going to work for me. First of all, the gay men that I brought paid most of the cover, but ultimately, all joking aside, it was, you know, wrong on all sorts of levels. And so stopped doing that. Volunteered for the Dyke March. I was on the planning committee for the Dyke March. At the kind of pre-March rally, I met 2 individuals that ran something called Indie Fest. And they asked me to come and work part-time. So again, working full-time, but then part-time in all these other ways.
Finding all of these extracurriculars that happen to be gay.
Right?
Was Indie Fest queer, or was Indie Fest just an arts thing?
It was run by two queer women,
Oh,
but
okay.
it was not by definition. No, it was for everyone. And so I did that for years, coordinated thousands of volunteers for Indie Fest, joined the Women's Fest planning committee at the center and helped run that. But all of those things ended. And I started to realize that there just wasn't space for women. And so that's when in 2014, I was still working for Special Olympics and decided to um, see if anyone would be interested in doing any type of event for queer women, just so that we had a space that was outside of the bars. And again, just took off. People, I think, really wanted that. They wanted a space that, fine, go to the bars, that's fun, but they wanted community. They wanted connection. That's what I saw over and over across all those different events. People wanted connection and community, which obviously is a human need. So started She Fest, ran that for a few years before handing it off to the amazing Stacy. I won't use her last name because I haven't asked her if she wants to be involved. But did an amazing job just growing the event and turning it into year-round programming. And so, yeah, so I went from not knowing a soul to event planning and kind of really jumping into the community, but met so many of my dear friends that I'm still friends with today. So it was a huge blessing.
Yeah. And She Fest has celebrated their 10th year this year. So,
Correct. Yeah, 10
yeah,
years. Going strong. Doesn't I'm not involved anymore, but support them and seems to be doing great. So I'm
yeah,
glad that that continues to be a place for now for women, non-binary, anyone who feels at home with She, um, which I love.
mm,
I just think they've done such a great job of making an inclusive, supportive event.
yeah. For those that are interested, they do year-round programming and they have like their own one-day festival the week before San Diego Pride celebration, which is an awesome like celebration on its own. A little more community feel um, than a big like music festival, but it's an awesome event. It is very inclusive, very intentional, and I think they do a great job shifting to what the community needs, like year to year too.
Absolutely. So make sure
And
you
you started
donate
that,
to She Fest. Well, a group of did. A group of
yeah,
people started it, but definitely donate to She Fest, attend, join their committee. There's different ways to get involved, but yeah, wonderful organization, and all the money, they're all volunteers. The planning committee, so all the money goes directly to the event. And then after that, I got out of nonprofit and I started working for local government and stayed 5 years to get vested in the pension system and then left because local government is not for me. Learned that pretty quickly. The bureaucracy and the, how do I say it? Maybe just the misalignment between words and actions and a little bit of the backroom dealings, that all was a big turnoff to me. I missed nonprofit. So only stayed there 5 years, but again, met some wonderful people and honestly had a manager that I consider to be my best example of how to lead and was a mentor to me. And I hope I have carried some of how she leads into my current profession. She was also out. She was a married lesbian woman in a conservative part of San Diego, and I was just floored every time we'd be in meetings with, there's cowboy hats and like people that are not okay with the LGBTQ community, and she just would talk about her wife and with just an air of this is everyday thing, and I had never experienced that, and so that was really freeing too, just to see someone stand in their being unashamed and just stand up to people. That was really
and in a leadership position to be able to do that as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I
Hmm.
see that.
Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, yeah, please.
I'm sorry this is all centered around work, but I feel like work is what led me to so many things. Which to my next point, I started working at the Arc of San Diego. So I started working there in February of 2020. March is when the pandemic started.
Hmm.
And so I'd only been there a month. I didn't really know my role. I was not in that industry, so it was a big learning curve in general. Minus the pandemic, and I was senior director, and there was a director. And that director had been there for many years, like 13 years. And she was really good at her job. Everyone knew her. And when the pandemic happened, almost all the departments went home and worked from home. But our department, we provided employment services for folks with disabilities. And most of the jobs that they were in were janitorial, food service, like the things that they said were essential workers that had to stay working. And so we had to come to work, and our clients had to keep going to work. And so we had this huge open concept floor with cubicles, and essentially it was me and her, just cubicles apart, splitting us, and just dealing with this situation that no one knew how to deal with. And add a layer on top of that, we had so many folks with kind of multiple diagnoses, so not just intellectual disability, but most of them had health disabilities as well. And so level of fear that they experienced, I'm terrified to go to work, but I can't afford to keep my apartment if I don't. And trying to work with their families and the social workers on navigating that was really hard. But through that process and through the long days and nights, the director and I, we would just talk. Some of it was about work, some of it, we'd be typing away, but we'd talk about childhood or music or whatever. And over the course of the time I was there, I just realized that this was the most awesome person I'd ever met, and found myself really looking forward to her coming to work and being really sad if she worked from home, and which is not me. I pretty much still that girl under the bleachers that wants to be alone and watch the sunset. And so I knew that something was different, and then that director turned out to eventually become my wife. And without all the previous experiences, I don't know if I would have gotten to the ARC. And so I feel like it kind of led me to her. And so we've been married 2 years, coming up here in a month, and we both have now transitioned to other organizations. I had the brief spell at Pride where I got the pleasure of working with you, and then went to my current role at Crisis House. So that's kind of the professional conditions from start to finish. And of course, a lot of things happened that were not professional in between there, but that's the work side.
Yeah. I'm learning so much.
Oh, I thought I had told you all this.
I think you have it, but then it's also just different hearing it in one go and like letting you speak uninterrupted. Um,
I'll touch on a couple things. So, because I think it adds to kind of the conditions that I want coming
yeah.
up. So, round about that time when I was at the ARC, I started fostering with an ex, and I have always loved kids, still do, kids and animals. And so I thought being a mom was something that I wanted. And as soon as I started fostering, I was met with a very stark reality of that I am not mother, great aunt, great babysitter, one day great grandma, but definitely not a mom. And that was really hard. It was hard for my partner at the time who had, envisioned this life, and me coming to the realization that that's not something I want. And that's a deal breaker, obviously. And so trying to navigate the pandemic and a new job and fostering a newborn, realizing that it's not what I wanted. So that was a really, really tumultuous time in my life. And I have never been the one to, in a large sense, let people down or walk away, or I'm the one that steps in those situations and helps and, fixes. And so to be the one that broke something took me, and probably honestly until now, so a good 4 years to really process and forgive myself and kind of find healing. So that all happened around that time. And around that same time, my brother started really struggling with depression and substance use disorder, and just a lot of tumultuous things happening, from him sending me a picture of what looked like 2 guns. And so me thinking he might kill himself, and come to find out they were just BB guns. But he was just in really bad shape and was causing a lot of pain with family and friends. And I didn't know what to do because he was in another state. And, my family went over, the ones that were in Texas, and tried to have an intervention. But over the course from 2020 to 2024, it just got worse and worse and worse. And then and the reason I teared up previously when I talked about my sister is I hate that we weren't there for him, because she was there for me, and that saved my life. And And so this is the first time I realized it, that, he needed somebody on his floor. He needed somebody to sit there with him. And so that'll be something I unpack with a therapist. But he passed away, as you know, a few months ago. And so, as with any big change, or especially with death, like, there's a cleansing that I think happens, because it's almost like everything gets ripped from you, all your clothes and your, metaphorically, and your disguises and your defenses, and you really just get torn down to kind of the immutable things that you are. And so, as when I look back now, like you said, now that I'm saying my whole life in one shot, as I look back on everything that we went through as kids, and coming out and finding our own way, it really has informed what I want next in my life, and what conditions I want to create, because there's no more wondering what people think or who I am. Or I know who I am, and I don't care what people think. I'm in my mid-40s, I'm premenopausal, I don't give a crap anymore, and it's very freeing. You're gonna love your 40s.
Okay, that's good.
And losing someone in this very tragic and unexpected way. And I just want to say, before we go further, my brother was amazing, hilarious, so witty, just the funniest out of our whole family. So brilliantly smart, so kind, loved animals. He was an amazing human being. And so I think part of the conditions I want to create, gosh dang it, part of the conditions I want to create include honoring his life, or finding ways to bond with him in this new relationship that we have. But honoring his life by taking the good parts, incorporating them, and amplifying them, and all the truth seeking I feel like I've been on, making sure that I help maybe other people find that, or that I pass on these good things, and really seek ways to, all the good things that people did for me, I want to be that for other people. And so whether, my brother paying my rent, or just ignoring that I came out, and, just loving me through that, instead of saying I rubbing my face in it. And, the leaders that I had that shaped who I was, and, Red, the gentleman that let me live on the street with him for a few days, like, that's the condition I want to create. I want to, from a personal standpoint, accumulate all those good things that have benefited me, and find out how I'm going to pass those on to other people. Because I think if there's one thing that we're here for, it's to recognize good and duplicate good. I think that's our purpose. And so on a personal level, I definitely want to become all the goodness that has been shown to me, which is going to be hard because I'm the worst, but I can do things to counteract that. And so that's on the personal side. On the professional side, my next big jump is I want to start my own business. And so I've already started looking into the process of, doing that, and looking for funding opportunities. And so that's the thing that I'm scared about. But if I've learned anything, it's that I may not have tomorrow. And so you got to take those chances. You have to step out there and do those things, because tomorrow may not be here. And so I'm really excited. Actually, this is the first thing I've been excited about at this level, maybe ever in my life. I feel like I'm, all my experiences, both personal and professional, kind of have set me up to get to this point. And so excited about ways that one, I can, run my own business, but then also trying to find ways to, folks experiencing homelessness, how does my business model ensure that I'm maybe providing work opportunities there, or survivors of domestic violence that I work with now, like, really creating a business model that is, I don't want it to be a social enterprise. Like, I do want to make a profit. I want to live off of this, but I think there's so much room for not philanthropy, but there's so much room for goodness within the for-profit sphere that just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not possible. And so I'd love to create a business model where we can achieve good things. And I mean, shoot, maybe make people part owners so that they can benefit, financially from it. And so I think all these pieces are starting to fall together in my mind. So I'm very excited about that. But both professionally and personally, how am I going to do good and serve others? And not because I'm a good person. I really have gotten into Buddhism, and that's like the main tenet. Serve others and do no harm. And I was just like, yes, that's what I want to do. And so I'm excited for what conditions are ahead, and grateful for the ones that have gotten me here, because life is a wonderful thing, and just want to make the most of it.
Damn, Kelsey, we should just end it there. Like, wrapped it up right here.
Good, because if I cry anymore, I'm gonna burn this whole place to the ground.
Wanted to, well, I thank you for being so honest and vulnerable with me and on the podcast. I just wanted to highlight like how different like the Kelsey that like, was in the ER with your sister there with you, and how that was at the same time as like your religious like awakening almost, and like discovering yourself and all of those value systems kind of being shattered, um,
Mm.
and how you were starting to think like, what are the values and rules that I want to live by? And now you're at a point where a different kind of event in your life, your brother in part, and his passing has made you like think like, well, I don't have an endless amount of time, but I do have all of these values I have learned. And now you're in a position of wanting to share that because you have them. They're very like solidified. You were like, I know who I am. I don't care how people like perceive me. And I know you say you claim you're not good. I think you're amazing. You're always an amazing like manager to me, and like obviously still like see to you as a mentor. And I think it's really awesome that you want to transfer all of that learning to pass on to people, because I think that is an underrated like about leadership, is actually leading others by giving them opportunities. And however you're going to do that in your business, we can talk about that offline, because you are private about those things, and you're like, until it's like set in stone, I will not say it out loud. So we'll talk about that
So
later.
there's an NDA, you're not getting anything.
I'll sign. But I love that transition and how you've kind of been able to shape that for yourself. Um, I admire that about you.
Well, thank you. And ditto. That's as nice as I shared too much, and now I'm like a turtle going back in its shell. It's like,
It's like coming
all
back.
you're getting.
Um, I guess you kind of already said it for folks. There is what's one rule or value that you would give others as a message, a closing message today. What would that be?
Ooh, one value. Um, I know it's gonna probably sound like a cop out, but I I really do think the idea of service to others is really transformative. When you do it, it changes you. You learn more about people. You think less about yourself. There's greater happiness, or I shouldn't say happiness, but greater, contentment. And so I think that's the value that I hopefully will always have. I just think that's, if there is any meaning or purpose to life, it's in serving others. And so whatever that looks like to you, find ways to do it, because I heard I'm so sorry I don't have the names of these people. There's some philosopher, I'm pretty sure it was a theologian, it might have been C.S. Lewis. He said that selfishness is doomed to frustration, centered as it is on a lie. And I've always loved that, because we are not the most important, and I think you will always feel frustrated and unfulfilled if you focus on yourself. I think it's in service to others that we really find life. So that would be it. And if you're gonna serve others, you can start with She Fest, and then the second thing you can do. My brother loved animals, so if there's a humane society where you live, please donate a few bucks in his honor.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kelsey, for sharing your experiences to this depth. Really appreciate you. Where can
Thank
our
you.
listeners, of course,
I mean that.
um, yeah, I know. I'm trying to be coy, Kelsey, because you might like take it back, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, that was it.
Like when I faked fire.
The day.
Yeah. Before I became using humor as deflection, I think you're going to ask where people can find me. Um, I have no idea what to tell you. Is an email? Is that what you're looking for?
That could just it could work. It could be your LinkedIn. That's up to you. You could be nothing.
Ooh.
I don't find me.
I like serving others, not talking to them. No, you can always find me on LinkedIn, Kelcie Parra. But we are always looking for supporters and help at Crisis House. So Kelcie at crisishouse.org is also a great way.
Awesome. Ooh, and I'll put that in the notes. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Creating Your Conditions, a work of understanding the conditions we are given, forged from, and that we have yet to face. Again, you can follow us on Instagram at Creating Your Conditions, which you can also find in the description of this episode. My name is Vin. It's been a pleasure to be your host and to listen. So keep creating conditions that are meant for you, and I'll catch you in the next episode. I'm going to stop